Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating theory. One that says there's this, hidden clock ticking behind the stock market. A predictable pattern that, get this, has nothing to do with who's actually in the White House.
So, check this out. The whole thing kicks off with a super bold prediction from a market analyst named Mark Chaikin. He's basically saying, yeah, a huge market crash is coming, but not yet. He thinks we're in for a bull market first.
And what's really wild about this prediction is that the theory behind it totally ignores all the usual stuff we hear about on the news. We're not talking about presidential policies or inflation or national debt. Nope, it's something else entirely.
All right, so let's get into it. Let's really look at this prediction and this hidden pattern that Chaikin claims is pulling all the strings.
And this really gets to the heart of the whole thing. The source asks this question. What if the market isn't really reacting to a specific president at all? What if it's reacting to which year we're in their 4-year term? Think about that for a second. And that question, well, that leads us right to the core idea here. It's a pattern that some people on Wall Street have been talking about for a while. They call it the election cycle.
Now, this isn't some fringe idea. We're talking about big firms like Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs studying this stuff. The theory is that each of the 4 years in a president's term has its own, let's call it a personality, a distinct rhythm that's been repeating for 100 years.
Okay, so how does this 4-year pattern actually work? Let's break it down year by year.
So you've got 4 phases. Year 1 is the post-election year. Everyone's optimistic. Year 2 is the midterm year. Things get rocky. Year 3, the pre-election year, is strong. And then you have the election year itself. But here's the kicker. The theory says the difference in performance between these years isn't just a little bit, it's huge, like night and day.
So let's start with year 1. This is the post-election year, so think 2025. This is supposed to be a really strong period for stocks. You know, that post-election honeymoon phase, lots of optimism in the air.
And the numbers cited in the source material are pretty compelling. I mean, get this. Over the last 10 cycles, this first year has been positive 90% of the time. And over the past 40 years, the average gain has been 21%. That's pretty significant.
Okay, but here's the turn. This is where the big warning comes in. Year 2, the midterm year, think 2026. This is, by far, historically the most dangerous and shaky year for investors.
How dangerous? Well, one study mentioned from a firm called Ned Davis Research claims that the average stock returns in year 2 are, wait for it, a whopping 75% worse than in year 1. 75%! That's just staggering.
And this chart right here just paints a perfect picture of it. You can see that massive dip for year 2. It's just squished right there between a really strong year 1 and, interestingly, an even stronger year 3, which is the pre-election year.
All right, so let's look at some real-world examples. What does the source material point to as proof?
Well, the theory points to stuff that's happened pretty recently. I mean, think back to 2018. That was year 2 of Trump's term, and we had that big market correction. Then look at 2022, year 2 of Biden's term. The market went into a full-on bear market. Both of them fit this year 2 pattern perfectly.
And Chaikin himself, the guy we started with, he basically says, hey, this cycle is my secret weapon. He credits it for his own calls, like predicting the 2018 correction, the 2020 sell-off, and then the big bull markets that followed in 23 and 24.
So you gotta ask, right? What's the logic? Why on earth would the second year be so consistently bad for the market?
Well, the source gives us a couple of ideas. First, any tough new policies that a president puts in place in their first year, the market might not really feel the effects of those until the second year. And second, you've got the midterm elections. That creates a ton of uncertainty. And if there's one thing the market absolutely hates, it's uncertainty.
So, okay, what's the big takeaway from all this? The key point here is really about shifting your perspective on what actually drives the market. In Chaikin's mantra, the one he keeps coming back to is this: follow the data, not the so-called experts on TV. Basically, tune out all that day-to-day noise from the news and just focus on these big, long-term historical patterns. So let's just sum it all up. The election cycle theory is all about taking a data-driven view. It says there's this repeating pattern. Year 1 is strong, year 2 is weak and volatile, and this whole cycle just keeps on turning. It doesn't matter if a Republican or a Democrat is in the White House. And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about.
If a predictable cycle like this can be humming along, mostly under the radar, in something as massive as the stock market, what other invisible cycles might be out there, quietly shaping our world?